Hello everyone, welcome back to another Lofi talk video. Today, let's discuss several platforms you can use to develop apps on. I've recently been working on an app on Android Studio, Xcode, and Flutter, so I wanted to make this video as a way to share my experience. So first of all, let me clarify that Android Studio and Xcode are not mutually exclusive because they work on different platforms. Like the name suggests, Android Studio only supports Android devices while Xcode only supports iOS devices. Flutter, on the other hand, is a kit that builds on these applications that allows for support for Android, iOS, Linux, etc. So now that I've cleared that up, let's get into the first tip. Tip number 1, you don't have to learn Dart before starting on Flutter. A lot of people get intimidated by the fact that you have to learn a new language in order to use Flutter, but the syntax of Dart is actually pretty similar to a lot of other programming languages, especially Java. I started with Java first when I was coding on Android Studio, so I found that transitioning to Dart on Flutter was actually not that difficult. I'm sure it'll be pretty much a very similar case with C++ and C#, and C users, and any other language that is kind of similar to Java, really. For Python users, it may be a little bit more complicated to learn about the function structure, but it should still be a pretty smooth transition. In addition, since you'll be using a lot of the tutorials to be building your own project anyways, the best way really to learn Dart is just by copying and pasting open source code to your own project, and then learning the functions of each line when you're searching up the documentation for any parts you need to adjust to your own project. Tip number 2, when you are working across platforms with kits like Flutter, make sure to check every once in a while, especially when you're making a big update, that your program works on all the platforms by running it on those platforms. So running your code to check that it works is really something you should be doing with any kind of programming, but it is especially important in this case because different platforms sometimes requires different permissions, and different devices sometimes have different screen sizes. So something that will work perfectly well on Windows might crash on an iOS device, or something that was adjusted to the right size on an iOS device might not look the same on an Android device. Speaking from experience, I primarily work on Android Studio, but when I was implementing a notification service, Android Studio's users might know what I'm getting at. Android does not prompt the user to provide permissions, but iOS does. So my notifications just gave me an error on iOS. It only took a little bit of debugging on Xcode to get it working, but these kind of permissions could easily pile up if you didn't regularly run your program. Tip number 3, try to leave duplicating code until after you finalize the design. For example, if you're making a checklist, finish the format of one checkbox first, and if you have absolutely no more changes, that's when you can duplicate that checkbox to make your list. The reason is pretty straightforward, but you don't want to be copying and pasting individual changes to 100 checkboxes when you could just be copying and pasting one whole checkboxes. Of course, this plan isn't perfect because you might find little things you want to tweak in the design even after you think you finished finalizing everything. But it does help to minimize the number of times you have to go back and copy and paste to every single checkbox. Tip number 4, you can set up GitHub in your project to synchronize changes. This is something you should generally be doing with any programming project, especially when you're working on a team. Sometimes you'll have to redo part of your project, and you might find that the new way you did might be even worse than the old way, so you might want to go back to the original version. And like most IDEs, Android Studio made it really easy to access version control by integrating as a service. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching it and learned something that could help you avoid a lot of trouble. See you next time.